Today we're going to look at the good, the bad and the ugly for the Elder Scrolls Online PvP classes. So stick around, we might just learn something. Hey, it's Dan and welcome back to Unified Gaming. Now in today's video guys, I want to go down and break down the PvP classes. What are they really good at? What are they bad at? How can you build your character based on that information? Like with the previous charts, I do run them by a number of people, so like Zidane, is there no one else? All the people in my Discord, so like a massive thank you to you guys, like 600 odd people in there currently as of this recording, so you can jump in there if you like, links in the description. And with this just gives you a good idea of kind of how should I build my class? You know, the class kit, what is it good at? I don't really factor in sets massively or PvP builds on the whole. This is kind of your typical, what is the class good at base if you have like a standard spec. So I do kind of avoid procs because they can really inflate these numbers heavily, but we will touch upon those for the right classes. And if you do like these types of videos, then do leave a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps. But with introductions out of the way, let's just get into it. Starting us off, we're on Magicka Sorcerer. And you'll probably notice the charts look slightly different. There's a thing on the right. We'll get to that in a moment. Magicka Sorcerer has loads of benefits, and from Stonethorn to Markarth, there hasn't been many changes in all honesty. The only big thing really is healing's gone up, so they've actually got better, especially the pet version. Damage wise, the damage is still really high thanks to Haunting Curse. They have really good just burst because of that and Crystal Frag, so those two things combine really well. Their mobility is through the roof thanks to Streak or Ball of Lightning. The defense is just really high because of shields. Like you can put on 2 shields, 3 shields and be really bulky, so that gives them loads of defense whilst being highly damaging. The big trade-off though, as you can see, is all of their AoE damage is just non-existent. Same with the dot builds, like you just can't make them on a Magicka build. It's just not viable, it's not really worth it. So Magicka Sorcerer wise, you either go into non-pet Sorc, which is like high max Magicka, or you go into pet Sorc where you can have some more heals, and again that's high max Magicka. So you kind of get very limited with how you build them, but they're highly effective for single target sort of play styles and solo stuff. They're okay in smaller groups, but the more people you get, the less useful they get. They only really bring Streak and Negate. If you have the pet Sorc, you got burst heals, but that's only for 3 people. So on the whole, fantastic 1vx class, fantastic solo, duo, 3-man, small man sort of groups, but as soon as you get more people, they get less and less useful. As for the bit on the right, which you notice over here, how easy to pick up. This is basically, if you picked up the game and you go, I'm brand new, or I just want to change PvP class, how well could I do on Sorcerer quickly? The lower this is, so the more green it is, the easier it is, so the quicker you can get okay on the class, right? You can get good. As for kind of how easy to master, if you want to be like Malcolm, is there no one else, Zidane, myself, you know, people who are really competent in PvP, lots of practice. The higher this is, the longer you need to spend practicing basically. It's quite hard to do what you see on YouTube, so just do factor that in, okay? As for Magicka Dragonknight, now this is going to be controversial, and I completely get people going, they're really OP right now. And if you strip away all the proc sets, so you take away Wrath of Elements, you take away Burn and Spellweave, which some of them might use, or they generally use Elfbane with Grothgar, which is quite a common setup, or Overwhelming Surge. Remove those kind of playstyles, Magicka, the class then lacks heavily, and that's what this shows. This shows that without those kind of procs, which it really crutches on, it's not great. However, if you give them those procs, these rankings will be vastly different. So just do factor that in, that if you want to be, you know, have more damage, use proc sets. Overwhelming Surge, Grothgar, Markarth, you're good to go. If you want to go and have kind of more survival, you go with more defensive stuff. So you can go with things like Buffer of the Swift, for example. So Magicka Dragonknight kind of needs a lot of proc sets or very specific sets to do well. So if you have any questions about what could you run to do well, leave a comment in the description and I'll reply to you, or jump into our Discord. We have loads of people who play DK, and again, they can help you there. As with kind of the rankings, you can see dual wise, they're really good, especially with procs. Same with BG solo, but the more people you add, the less effective they get. As for Cyrodiil, and like this is Cyrodiil what I see, so Imperial City, they are okay, but again, they have the same issue. Solo, they kind of lack survival, which is what you can see, the defense is a bit low, their self-heals are a bit low, they lack mobility, and as you get more and more people, because they're a melee class, melee fights don't happen in big fights generally, it's more ranged fights, so again, they're not too great. As for the scale on the right, if you were somebody picking up Dragonknight for the first time, it's kind of a medium difficulty. It's not really hard to do well on, but it's not easy. You know, you will die a few times. It does have a bit of a learning curve. And if you want to master it and become really, really good, I would check out like Zidane. He does a lot of DK stuff. He's really good on it. It's hard. But it's really hard to do well on DK, especially in 1vx. So just factor that in. If you want a 1vx on this, it's going to be tricky. Proc sets can help you. I would also check out Ness ESO. He does a lot of Mag DK and he's really good on it. So yeah, go check out those two. They'll give you lots of stuff on YouTube. As for Magicka Nightblade, you can see there's two colours once more. So we have the blue one, which is kind of just the Nightblade generally, and the red one, which is the bomber spec, you know, Vicious Death, the typical blow people up. Now, Nightblade has similar issues with Magicka Dragonknight in that it does need some procs to do okay. It's not end of the world, but it just, yeah, it does have some issues. The big one it lacks is a burst heal. So although it's got a good self heal with like Swallow Soul and also heal over times with Siphoning Strikes, for example, you have to be actively fighting to get those heals. So as soon as you go defensive, you don't have a burst heal and you're kind of really, really punished for that. So you need to kind of use shields or have to use some of the restoration stuff, skills, and then again that limits how you build your character, and the heals aren't just bursty enough. So that's the big issue with this. And you also find as well that the defense is quite low, that they do lack a lot of just bulk because they don't have any kind of damage reduction passives beyond Dark Cloak. So if you use Dark Cloak, it's okay, but if you don't, then you're a bit eh. As for burst and damage, they are really good for burst and damage if you can land it. And that's, you know, this is potential, and that's the key bit here. If you land the combo, it absolutely wrecks people, but if you don't land the combo, it's really difficult. And again, single target, the skills actually hit quite hard for a Magicka class, but trying to get that burst off can be tricky. So I'd recommend using something like Torag's Patch to help fix that. There is a build on the channel that does help solve that. And then from like dots and stuff, they're pretty good. So you can make some okay dot builds with them. But the big thing that, you know, Nightblade lacks is utility. That's the biggest thing. Whether you're, you know, a normal one, you can't just do anything to help a group really. You've got no good buffs that other classes can't access. And above all, you don't really bring much damage. So you're kind of a bit, you'll be better with a bomber. So a bomber is somebody that uses things like Vicious Death and Mechanical Acuity. That's kind of like the best kind of setup currently. You can put on Balor with that to just be like super burst. And that allows you to just nuke multiple people, but you can see the sustain and the defense just gets absolutely gutted, as does the dot damage. And the like group heal strength has just gone as well. So you can't be a healer if you have a bomber. So just do factor that in. As for the rankings, you can see down here that normal Nightblade's kind of good for duels, and as you get more people, they get less and less, great. But obviously, bomber Nightblades, they're bad in duels, BG solo, but as soon as you get into Cyrodiil and there's lots of people, they become really good. You will find that when you have about 12 to 24 people fighting in an area, that's when you have a bit of an issue, because you have, you know, you can't always get the bomb off straight away. If you can, it's great, which is why it's not like 1, but if you can't, then you're useless. So is that real kind of, it's 3 out of 5, it's great when it works, but it doesn't work too often. And then as for kind of how easy is it to pick up and master, well, Nightblade's a bit difficult to pick up. It's not really hard, but it's not really easy. It does take some time to get used to. You have to light attack or weave heavily. So if you don't light attack, you're going to find this hard instantly. And as for mastering it, it is one of the hardest classes to master in PvP. You typically find that Magicka builds on the whole are harder to master than stamina because they don't have the burst, they don't have the movement, which those are really big factors in PvP. So this will take a while to get used to this. People like Zidane are great on Magicka Nightblade. Blob ESO did a video recently, so his channel's called Blobs, and he had one that's about 6 weeks old now, but it's quite a good build, so that might be worth looking at. Or there's one on my channel as well. As for Templar, Templar's a really interesting class. It's your typical go out, heal people, purifying like paladin type stuff. It's, you know, it's pretty cool. It's very repetitive is the only kind of thing I would say. You know, it's quite monotonous and just like, going through the motions. But it does have lots of good like things with it. The big thing is that it's really clear what you play. The group heal that it has, you know, have access to Breath of Life or the healing ult that it has, or even the AoE. You just got loads of group healing, which is just amazing. And then you also have some good self-healing. You got access to the best purge in the game, and this allies can synergize to have like remove all their dots, which is great, especially in this meta. So group utility wise, these are really good kind of healers and support builds. They do lack mobility, but they have good defense because of the block passives they get. As for kind of the damage did take a nerf this patch, so the changes to Burning Light did reduce Magicka Templar's damage quite heavily. So it means that although you can kill people, they're just not as bursty as they were before because they were kind of relying on that passive, in all honesty. And that kind of affected all of this, and it also meant that some of their just AoE damage, although it didn't suffer massively, it's still a bit underwhelming. So all in all, it's a great class to pick up like early on. It's kind of easy to pick up, do well, you know, it's just jab, 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 and jab, 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 and they might die. But it can be a bit hard to master. If you want to do well with it on 1vx, it's a bit tricky because it's not your typical go out and 1vx class. It doesn't have the right kit, but it does have really good support roles. So if you learn how to master this as a healer, for example, this is great. So fantastic healers, just not so much a 1vx build. Yes, it can do it, but that's more player skill rather than class. And then Magicka Warden, which many of you know, I main Magicka Warden, so this is my favourite class. It can do everything really well, which this chart shows. It's kind of a jack of all, master of none. So it does everything well, but nothing godly. The one thing it does well though is group utility. This is like ridiculous. Like the group utility a Magicka Warden has is just phenomenal. It's got great healing, it's got good buffs, it's got snares and immobilizers, so that's again really, really useful. And it can also give people extra health, so just a really, really good utility build. Even on a damage dealer, you've got just these passive buffs anyway, so really good utility. Identity wise, it's really apparent what you're doing, which does kind of come up as a bit of a cost because you're easy to predict. People know what you're going to do next. So I would recommend, if you're after a good sort of Magicka Warden build, I do have a build called Frostbite on the channel. Like, you can go check it out. There's a link in the description for it. And basically that really helps fix this issue, which is the burst. Magicka Warden struggles to confirm kills. It can go out and do well, damage loads of people really fast, as you can see with the AoE damage, but it doesn't have the kind of final hit, the bit of oomph that you need to just get that final kill. And so you need things like Torag's Pact to help fix that, or Winterborn. So there are two good sets you can add to any build to do just somewhat okay on this. And then one thing which is really surprising, I don't think people really give it enough merit, is the dot damage. Magicka Warden is probably, if not the best, dot Magicka class in the game. They have so many damage boosts, that means that you can put on so many dots and procs and stuff and boost those damage, like those dots heavily, which means you become like a dot DK at range. I actually have a build coming out on the channel, so make sure that you are subscribed because it's nuts. And it's just ridiculous the damage you can do with dots. So yeah, this is really, really fun to play a Warden like this. Unusual, but really fun. Ranking wise, you know, it's all down here. And then as for kind of, is it easy to pick up? Yeah, it's easy to pick up. You can get the class, you can do okay on it quite early on. You know, it's got good bulk, good defense, okay sustain. It's got kind of everything that you need. It does take a while to master it though. You know, you're not going to get kills easily. You're not going to, you know, be godly, do what I do or do what other people do on it, because it takes a while to practice, to master. So I would recommend that if you see what I do or other people, look at it, break it down, and then go, actually, what can I do? And a big part of it is movement. Magicka Warden's really dependent on movement for success and its predictability. So you have to kind of almost learn how to predict what the target's going to do in order to land your burst and to nuke people. So that's the one thing I'll say with Magicka Warden. It's easy to pick up, but it's a bit tricky to master because you are struggling to confirm kills. And then our last Magicka class is Magicka Necromancer, and again, this is a DLC class. It's an interesting class. So Magicka Necromancer is like Magicka Warden, but it just has bugs and has issues with it, which means that when it works, it's phenomenal, and it should be one of the best Magicka classes in the game. But because it has such a big issue with blast bones and just the kit doesn't really talk to itself properly, you then have issues, and you can see it becomes more and more apparent. The burst is fantastic, but it's really hard to get off. You know, blast bones is a bit buggy. They nerfed Soul Assault, so Soul Assault is not really a good option for burst anymore. You got your ultimate, so your Flesh Atronach, which again, great for burst, but it's really predictable. It's easy to get out of, and it costs so much you can't use it too often. So again, you can't get your burst off easily. That means that single target damage, although is good, and it's, you know, it's high with how hard each skill hits for, you can't land them consistently to get the burst. So you could get it if it all lands, and you can nuke somebody, but It doesn't always line up, so just do factor that in. And then class identity though, it's really obvious what you are. One thing I would say though is Necromancers make surprisingly good healers, like one of the best group healers in the game. They've got really cool heals, and they've got really good utility skills like the totem, so it's the fear totem. They drop it on the floor and it gives you minor protection, and anybody that walks into the circle that's like an enemy, they'll get stunned every 3 seconds. So this is a great kind of stand your ground as a group. So anybody who tries to attack your group, just chuck that down and you're going to be hard to kill. Sustain wise, they're pretty good for sustain actually. They do lack some mobility. You notice that the red ones are like your typical, Inferno type staff or lightning staff, Necromancer. Your blue one's your Harmony build where you're using Harmony. It does give you a lot more AoE damage, so Harmony still hits hard even with the nerfs last patch. But it's not predictable. You can't get it off easily. So I've put it a bit lower this patch because actually people will move out of the way, and you only really do well if you can land the skills properly. So yeah, it's just clunky. As for kind of how easy is it to pick up, it's kind of in the middle. It's like Magicka Warden. You can pick it up and do okay, but because of the bugs, it then makes it harder because you have to kind of learn to play around those. And then for like how easy is it to master, it takes a long time to get good at this. So it takes a long time to get good because of the bugs. So yeah. We're now moving on to stamina classes, and before we do that, I just want to say a massive thank you to all the support we've had recently. It's really appreciated, and we're actually pushing for 10,000 subscribers by the end of the month, so by the end of the year, which would be amazing if we can get that. So if you like what we do, like, comment, share. It really helps, and make sure that you are subscribed. Many of you are still not, which is just mind-boggling. As for kind of Stamina Sorcerer, you'll find there's a general theme to stamina that you have higher single target burst, higher mobility, and that kind of mobility does aid to sort of defense because you can just avoid damage completely. So you either reduce damage or you just avoid it, and avoid it's better. So because of those three things, you find stamina's typically better at duels and solo stuff, but the more people there are, the less good they get. Stamina Sorcerer also has really good self-healing, and this self-healing does include health recovery builds. So if you use things like Troll King and Eternal Vigor, for example, with Crit Surge, you're really hard to kill because your self-healing is just so high. Like you're getting 1 to 2k health every second from Crit Surge, plus you're getting 3,000 health recovery with the set. So you actually have a lot of passive healing just for doing nothing. So yeah, you have Dark Deal as well, which is just ridiculous. So again, really good self-heals on this. This means that it's quite easy to pick up. Like this isn't one of those classes that you can take a while to do well on. It's quite easy to pick up and it's quite easy to master. It's very movement based. If you move well, you'll do well. That's kind of it really. As for Stamina Dragonknight, I've actually got a build on the channel. I have updated it for this patch. The same sets do work, by the way, so you can use the previous one, which is Bone Pirate and Clever Alchemist. So you can use that, but as with just Stand DK this patch, they kind of got a buff but a nerf at the same time. So they got a buff in the sense that their self-heal went up because of the changes to healing on the whole. So actually they end up getting a slight healing boost, which is awesome. They do get some bonus damage as well because of the changes to Breach. That's slightly better now. So they get slightly more penetration, but people have slightly more armor. So your damage kind of equalizes itself on the whole. The issue they have though is that their sustain, although is okay, you're very reliant on using your ultimate, and because performance is a bit questionable right now, you're not getting your ultimate off easily. Like Leap isn't working properly. Even in Markarth, I still have issues casting it, which means if you can't cast your ultimate, you can't get your resources back. Your sustain gets lower, your damage gets lower. So just a few bugs in the game is making this class not as good as it could be. The one thing I will say is though that dot builds are really strong this patch with the changes to just the new arena. So you've got access to Wrath of Elements, for example. A lot of DKs and just stamina builds generally backbar that, because you can easily with something like New Moon in the front bar, which means you get free bonus damage, which is awesome, and you get more Magicka Sustain, which means you can do more Fragmented Shields, which gives you better healing. So, there's lots of ways you can build a DK this patch. The one thing I will say though is that it looks cool, it's actually quite hard to play. So it's not easy to pick up, and it's really hard to master. Like it takes a long time to get used to this, but if you do, it's a very, very good class. So great for duels and BGs, good for solo stuff. but it just takes some practice to get used to it. So if you don't move properly, you're gonna die. If you want obviously help with this, jump into our Discord, I can help you further. Stamina Templar is really weird currently. It's got really high damage, more than you'd suspect based on the chart, but it's a bit predictable, which is why I put it a bit lower. That you are very reliant on Purifying Light, which is the delayed burst skill. So you put it on somebody, you jab, 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 and it blows up and does loads of damage. The jabs hit hard, the Burning Light got nerfed, so the damage went down, and it means that because the damage is down, you're not filling Purifying Light up as quick as it was, and it can't crit as it did because it was bugged, so it was doing more damage than it should be. So it means that your damage has dropped, but in no CP, these are really good, because no CP has less mitigation, less damage reduction basically, which means you do more damage on these. So these are really good in no CP, but when you get to CP Cyrodiil, with people having slightly more bulk, slightly more health, these become less and less good. So this is what this chart shows, that actually you can get good damage out of it, but it does have some issues, like you don't have good group heals, your mobility is a bit lackluster, you don't really have much utility beyond the cleanse, which this is good for a stand build, by the way. The dot damage is hit and miss now, and you don't really have great defense, so you do lack some issues with Stamina Templar. And the charts are the bits on the right does show that, like, you can pick it up well and do okay, but it does take a long time to get good at it, so just do factor that in. And all the rankings are on the bottom left, as you can see. As for Stamina Nightblade, I've put 3 colours on this, so I'm going to go through each colour because it looks a bit crazy, but yeah. So the first one is the green colour, which is your typical Stamina Nightblade. This is obviously around here, so you can see it if you can see the screen. If you're just listening to this, I'll kind of give you the just general rundown. Burst is really high, but because you have to land Spectral Arrow, which is Merciless Resolve, that's quite predictable, so it's hard to get in-cap into Spectral Arrow, which means that you don't get the bonus damage because you miss the arrow quite often, so the burst potential is a bit lower. Your single target damage though is really high. I've posted a Nightblade build recently that uses just crafted sets, and the damage is ridiculous. Like, I'm hitting people for like 5.5k, 6k surprise attacks with just one skill. So light attack, surprise attacks doing like 7-8k damage. It's ridiculous. Identity wise, it's really apparent what you are because you're roly-poly, you've got a cloak, it's quite easy to see what you're doing. You're very high speed a lot of the time, so you try to just avoid damage because your defense is low. So it's better just to avoid it with cloak, roll dodge, than it is to kind of be bulky. And that means your mobility is high as a result. You can get around the battlefield quickly with shade, and you can also do sort of pretty good self-healing because of access to cloak, which gives you some good rally crit heals. As for kind of the other colours, the red and the purple, these are sniper builds, which are very different. So I've actually got a sniper that is on the channel. It's min-max. There's 2 versions. There's one called Shadow. There's one called the Bow Gank. Shadow basically has stupid sustain. The Bow Gank has stupid damage, so I've kind of gone in the middle. If you go with just the typical sniper, high burst, the burst is ridiculous. Like, the amount of damage you can do within 2 seconds is stupidly high, and it's at range, so it's really hard to counter. It is hard to play though, so just do factor that in. It's easy it looks easy, but to get the combo off and to kill people correctly, it needs a lot of practice. You need to be able to pick the right target, so do factor that in. As with kind of that high damage, you do lose sustain, you lose defense, you do lose just other stuff generally. And then the proc sniper, which is a brand new one, which I have used on Twitch, so you can see this on Twitch as well. This uses 3 proc sets, and you literally hit 1 snipe and you get 3 lots of procs at once, and it does stupid damage. A lot of it is damage over time based, which means you hit 1 skill, they get loads of burst, and you get loads of dots, which means people die really quick from this if they don't heal. So this is a really fun way of playing the Nightblade. It's just a bit cheesy in all honesty, so if you want to go with procs and stuff, Nightblade is very powerful for that. If you want to go with just high burst, snipers are very good for that. If you want to go with kind of an all-round melee roly-poly build, that's what your Nightblade is. So it means it's great in duels, battlegrounds, solo sort of stuff. The sniper gets better when there's more people, so like when there's kind of 2 or 3 people in a fight, they're good because you can pick people off. But as soon as it's like 1v1 in a duel, they know you're there, so that's not great. The proc one does have the dots to help keep the pressure up though, so it does help. And as you get more people, the snipers get worse and worse because they can't pick the right target to finish them off. So that's how Stamina Nightblade is currently. As you can see, easy to pick up, hard to master. As for Stamina Warden, this is our next DLC class. And what this has is loads and loads and loads of burst, which is great. And you get just loads and loads of kind of just general goodness. You notice there's 3 colours, so there's the purple, the green and the red. The purple is your typical warden, so it could be bow, it could be sword and shield. Your green is using 2H, your red is using dual wield. Your typical warden kit is great self-healing, really clear what you are, good dot damage with cut and dive and stuff, and grow and swarm. The downside is that you don't have an execute, so that's where the 2H warden fixes it, because it has access to executioner and dizzying swing, which gives it loads of burst with subterranean assault. The dual wield warden has kind of, it trades that single target burst for AoE burst with Dawnbreaker and subterranean assault and whirling blade, which is spin to win. So you kind of have 3 ways to build it really. You kind of got your typical warden where you might use a bow, you might use a mix of skills, so generally class skills, or you have very 2H focused warden with dizzying swing, executioner, your standard Stamden, or you go with dual wield. Each are good at their own thing. Dual wield's AoE, 2H is single target. Your stamina warden kind of covers all bases okay. So that's kind of how the chart is. They're easy to pick up, and they're somewhat hard to master. It takes a bit of time to get used to them, but they're not really hard. And ranking wise, you can see that actually the ranking is pretty reflective of how they do. So all in all, they're pretty good on the whole. Stamina Necromancer, this is the final DLC class and the final class in this list. This has great burst. If you land the burst, the damage is stupidly high. It can be awkward, but because Blast Bones was fixed in melee range, it's actually quite reliable now. So your burst is really high, whether you use 2H or you use dual wield or just a standard one. You see that the 2H one, because it has dizzying swing and execution, the burst is higher as a result. But the dual wield, again, it does what Magicka Stamina Warden does. It kind of sacrifices this single target burst for AoE burst. And you end up getting more AoE burst with Dawnbreaker, Blast Bones, Spin to win. You also find as well that actually they make pretty okay dot builds, particularly the dual wield versions, because of the passives they have, so they can be quite good dot builds. These are more your kind of typical 1vx, so like solo type class, as with a lot of stand builds typically. They kind of get less and less good in groups. The only saving grace is they have one of the best ultimates in the game, which is the Flesh Atronach, which basically comes down and applies major vulnerability, which did get nerfed, but it kind of got buffed at the same time, so it gives you less bonus damage, but you can have 100% uptime. So it's a really useful change because you can get more bonus damage for a longer period of time, which is kind of what you want in large groups. You won't always just one-shot people, so particularly in this meta, that's probably a better change. But all in all, it's a really, really powerful class. And then as for kind of how easy is it to pick up, the class plays itself. Like, you got loads of damage reduction passives, and then also skills to reduce damage further, so you're really bulky, even in medium armor. You then have really high burst. You got crazy like self-heals and sustain. Like, you got good sustain skills, you got good self-heal skills. So it kind of has everything you need to do well in PvP. The one thing it does lack is mobility, but because you can go medium armor, you fix that. So it's a very, very strong class. And then as for kind of can you master it easily or hard, it's quite easy to pick up and easy to master. It doesn't take much practice. Because you have so much just passive buffs for free with doing nothing, it means that actually you get a lot of free stuff, which makes life much easier. Like you're bulky without doing any real building into it or any real effort. You have really good damage because of the skills it has, and it has Defile to help confirm kills. And on top of that, you have really good self-healing, which again makes you harder to kill. So all in all, it's one of the best stamina classes and the best class in the game, period, pretty much. And based on people's feedback from last time, I've actually included the Werewolf, and I've gone through and kind of looked at how is Werewolf doing currently. I have kind of lent more on the Stamina Sorcerer Werewolf because that is typically the strongest spec for it. But this is just the general Werewolf on the whole, what it gives you, but more towards Damn Talk passives, okay? It's really apparent you're a werewolf. Like, you look like a werewolf, it's obvious. So class identity is through the roof. It's ridiculously bulky. Like, they get loads of free armor passives. They get like 10,000 armor just for being in werewolf form. I think there might be 15,000, but it's a lot of free armor. Their self-heal is like stupidly busted. It basically heals like most half, if not most of your health by one button. It is very, very, very expensive. So the sustain is a bit hit and miss for Magicka, but if you use Internal Vigor, for example, you fix the Magicka sustain, Thus, you can do more self-heals, which buffs your damage as well. And it also helps you sustain with one of the morphs. So you end up getting like loads and loads of just survivability from it. So really hard to kill werewolf. As for the kind of their damage, they don't have much burst, in all honesty. It's very kind of, they jump on you and wail on you and just keep that pressure up, pressure until you die. If you can move around in line of sight, you will stay alive a lot easier. But because werewolves have really good mobility, they've got a really great gap closer, they've got really good movement speed buffs in werewolf form, they're hard to get away from. So that's a bit of an issue, and they also have really great dot damage. So on the whole, the werewolf is like a really solid just kit that actually, if you're on a class that you don't do well on, you might find that just being a werewolf might fix that. So particularly if you're a stamina class. So if you find Stamina Nightblade hard, just make it a werewolf, try that, you might actually have more success with it. So that's just one thing I would say. It's very, very easy to pick up. Like, you got all the stuff you need over here. And it's not that hard to master because it's very repetitive. The one thing you just have to get good at is moving. Like, once you got used to moving, you're going to do well on werewolf. And you can put on sets to help with that anyway. You can put on like Crimson to give you survival. You can put on Eternal Vigor to give you health recovery and Troll King, for example. There's loads of ways to build them in order to just make this even easier. So the trade-off is that you lose all your class skills, but you gain loads of powerful werewolf skills. And it does kind of show in the rankings that in duels they're very powerful, BG solo they're powerful, group stuff they're pretty powerful, but when you get into really big fights, they're not so good. But that's where werewolf would be currently. And as we've just done werewolf, it wouldn't be right not to do vampire. And wow, is that a big difference. It's like day and night. So werewolf is really powerful, vampire is not as good. The difference is that being a vampire, you can access your class skills. So what I've done is I've looked at the vampire kit and kind of said, what does the kit kind of add to your class? So, and kind of if you just use all the vampire skills as well, or if you use a bit of both. So this kind of is a bit hard to judge, but it gives you an idea. Single target vampire skills they're okay. The vampire claw is pretty good for damage, does a lot of damage, but the burst is not there, so you don't have any good burst with the vampire kit, so it's kind of typical. If your class has burst, this will go up. If the class doesn't have burst, it will go down. If your class has bad single target damage, then you could use this to fix it. So that's the one thing that's good with the vampire. The vampire has really bad dots, so if your class has good dots, being a vampire won't make it any better. In all honesty, it might make it worse if you slot the skills. Vampire has very little AoE damage apart from the ultimate, so if you're a class that wants more AoE damage and you use the vampire ultimate, but you could use the destruction staff ultimate, so again it doesn't solve that issue. And it's the same with AoE burst, that the vampire kit doesn't give you any AoE burst. The one thing the vampire kit does give you is defense, and lots of defense. Like, it gives you basically Markarth the Pariah as a passive for stage 3. So if your class is like really low defense, so it's like 4 defense, like a Stamina Nightblade, go vampire stage 3, which I did. This gives you a lot more bulk and it makes you much harder to kill. So this is a really good way to fix the class's defense if you have this issue. So that's generally how I use vampire currently. Sustain wise, you see the sustain is actually worse than normal because you get cost increase. So if you use the vampire skills, they're cheap, but if you use any class skills, they cost more. So this sustains hit and miss. If you're using loads of vampire skills, it will go up. If you're using more and more class skills, the sustain gets worse and worse and worse, and it actually hurts your class. So just do factor that in. Mobility wise, vampire has access to mist form, which is a really good skill. So if it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, it's terrible, which is how it is currently. But when it works, it's good. And so if your class, you go, I lack mobility, I can't get around, like Magicka Dragonknight, for example, mist form is a really good way to fix that, as well as Magicka Templar. So this is a really good way to fix mobility on a class. Utility wise, the vampire brings nothing. The self-heal strength is typical, your self-healing's a little bit lower because you lose some health recovery, but beyond that, you don't really get any good heals from it. Same with group heals, and class identity is not really apparent you're a vampire beyond how your skin looks, which is hard to see in PvP anyway, unless you're using vampire skills like Mistform. If you use Mistform, it's 100% you're a vampire. If you don't use Mistform, you wouldn't really know. So that's kind of what a vampire is. It's like an augmentation to your class. If your class is good at damage, but really bad at defense, a vampire could be a really good thing for you. If your class is really bad at mobility though, then a vampire could be a good thing for you again. But if you want to use damage for a vampire, it's not great. If you want to use dots for a vampire or AoE damage, it's not great. Same with healing. And that's kind of the issue with vampires. So, you know, it's easy to pick up in that it gives you lots of free cool stuff like defense and mobility, but it doesn't give you anything else. As for kind of how easy is it to master, it's, you know, to use the vampire skills properly and effectively in PvP, they're really hard. Like really hard. It's not impossible, but it's just more difficult. So that's where vampire is currently. It's a bit controversial. I'd like to know what you think about that one. That was one that I was struggling to kind of summarize. So how did I do with that? Did I get that one right? And did I get the other classes right, or did I get them wrong? I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment. Which was your favourite class? Which was the class that you think, oh, I got wrong? Are there any classes that you agree with completely? Like, do let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more of these types of videos, then make sure that you are liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really tells me this is what you want to see coming up. And for all those people on Patreon and just people that want to support me, it's really appreciated. There's a link in the description. But this video is long enough as it is, so I'm going to wrap this one up here. I'll catch you in the next video or on Twitch if you see us on the weekend. But with that said, guys, I'm just going to say bye. So take care, thanks for watching, and bye.